Now we're going to talk about a very important topic that, well, at the end of the day is not the sexiest of things ever. This is the difference between the Florida as-is contract and the standard contract in Florida. The topic is extremely important because which contract you choose can make or break what how the real estate deal goes for you. So let's jump right in. So the as-is contract is by far and away the most used contract in the state of Florida. And when most people, especially outside of Florida, hear as is, they think that there is no ability to get an inspection. And that is quite simply not true unless you put 0 days in the inspection period on the contract. So the main difference between the two contracts really comes down to the inspections and how things work with the inspections. So on an as-is contract, a lot of people use it because it gives power to the buyer to do their due diligence. And if during that due diligence period, things are not what they thought that they were, they find problems in the house, or they just decide not to move forward on the house, the buyer ultimately has the right to cancel the contract. So there's an extreme amount of power there, and they would get their deposit money back. So the way that the as-is contract reads is it says the buyer at the buyer's sole discretion may terminate the contract and all parties be released under the contract, and the deposit goes back to the buyer. So you can see very broad language that protects people there. Now, from a seller's perspective, the as-is contract is nice in that it does not require them to make any repairs. There's nothing in the as-is contract that would put any kind of pressure or require that seller does anything to remedy any of the problems that are there. Now, what I always advise around this is that a seller generally, if the buyer decides to walk away from the deal, the seller then needs to disclose any known defects to the property because they became aware of it during the inspection period. So if there are issues that come up, buyers can still ask a seller to make concessions and or repairs during the inspection period on an as-is contract, and the seller can say yes or no. They're not obligated to anything, but generally speaking, there is some negotiation that happens in most real estate deals. Now, how is this different on the standard contract? Well, the standard contract obligates the seller to a certain amount of repairs, okay? What that defaults to is 1.5% of the purchase price would be required for the seller to repair for general repairs. Another 1.5% for any kind of wood destroying organisms, so termites, wood decay, those types of things. And then another 1.5% for any kind of permit issues. Permit issues, it could be if there's they didn't get a permit on something, or if there's any open permits that the seller would have to remedy that situation. Now, that permitting also brings up a very important distinction between the two contracts, because if there was any work done on a property that was not done with the proper permits, on the standard contract, the seller is obligated to remedy that problem. On the as-is contract, as long as it was disclosed, there's actually no obligation there to the seller to make any kind of concession or make any repair to the permit issue that existed. So that's a really big deal. And the other side of it is once the seller does what they need to do with disclosing on an as-is contract, they're done, right? So after closing, the seller can wash their hands of the property and be done, as long as they disclosed any known defects. Whereas on the standard contract, they could be open to historical issues that they didn't disclose or anything like that on the standard contract. So there are some major distinctions. Now, here's what I will say. We're starting to see more people lean towards the standard contract. Why would they do that? Because what's been happening is that as interest rates have gone up, as the media is talking about economic issues, buyers have been canceling more and more contracts. And so they can do that during their inspection period. There's no reason that they can't do that. That's on an as-is. In the standard contract, they don't have the sole discretion anymore, right? So they would need to have bigger issues than the threshold that the seller is obligated to for repairs. Otherwise, they're really stuck in that contract, right? They're committed, they're stuck into the contract, and they can't cancel at their sole discretion. So these are big deals, important distinction. Now, which contract should you use? And I would say that really depends, right? That depends on whether you're a buyer, whether you're a seller, and what your ultimate goals are. We speak with a lot of clients who, a buyer, they say, you know, I want to have the ability to back out, or I need somebody to fly into town to see the property in person. Well, you really need an as-is contract to be able to protect you from that perspective. Now, if you know you're going to move forward with it and you want to make sure if there's anything that comes up on the inspection that the seller has to fix it, then it sounds like you should go towards the standard contract. So that really comes down to what your ultimate goal is with the property and the transaction. But those two contracts, they have their pros and cons, and this is to help you understand what those are. If you have more questions about that, any real estate related questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help. And also please like and subscribe. Appreciate it. Have an amazing day. We'll talk soon.